Good evening, Moon Princess here, and tonight we're going to talk about a true crime case, and this time it is the case of the mysterious drowning of Natalie Wood, the famous actress from San Francisco. So Natalie Wood was in Miracle on 34th Street at the young age of 8 years old, and before the age of 25 she had been nominated for 3 Oscars, one of which was for her role in Rebel Without a Cause. She was also in West Side Story, so she was glamorous, larger than life, doe-eyed. She was born July 20th, 1938. Her real name was Natalie Nicola. I can't pronounce that. She was the daughter of Russian immigrants. Her studio chose to change her name for her acting career. American names seem to sell. Like American. If you have a name that sounds like you're an immigrant, you're less likely to get a job. That's the world we live in right now, unfortunately, and I hope this changes one day. So, Wood grew up in a violent family. Her father was an alcoholic, emotionally abusive. She was coerced into sexual acts with then 42-year-old director Nicholas Ray when engaged in her role in Rebel Without a Cause to prove she could be bad. I found numerous details and articles discussing how she was sexually exploited in her early life. Wood was an obedient daughter. Her parents emphasized the importance of being quiet and of maintaining the peace, so as to not cause any trouble. Her mother never protected her at home. She was taken advantage of by directors while executives turned a deaf ear. She experienced familial pressures early on from her mother, who wanted her daughter to serve as the breadwinner through her childhood acting career. For memorizing lines earned her the name One Take Natalie. Wood even dated the infamous heartthrob Elvis Presley at one point. To go to the movies, he bought out the theater, according to her sister Lana. It is said that Elvis brought her home with him to Tennessee, but she and his mother did not get along too well, and Natalie was uncomfortable with how close and overly affectionate a relationship Elvis had with his mother Gladys. This is again according to Lana. Things like "come sit on Mama's lap," and then Elvis later referring to Natalie as Mad Nat. Okay then. Husband 1, husband 2. So, husband 1, Robert Wagner. Then she married Gregson. Then she married Wagner again. So she marries fellow actor Robert Wagner in 1957, whom she met at the ripe age of 18. They divorced 4 or 5 years later. In 1961, Natalie and Robert Wagner's wedded bliss comes to an abrupt end, something which negatively affected Natalie. Magazines came out with articles claiming the marriage ended as a result of an affair between her and Warren Beatty amidst the filming of Splendor in the Grass, claims which later turned out to be false, when in fact it was Natalie who walked in on RJ, sexually engaged. According to her sister Lana, Natalie came to their parents' home upset, bloodied, and locked herself in her old bedroom. She consumed sleeping pills, leading to a drug overdose and temporarily entering into a coma. Numerous suicide attempts by Natalie occurred, either around this time or later down the line. Then, in 1969, Wood marries again. She married her second husband, Richard Gregson, a screenwriter and film producer. They had been on again, off again, attributed to the long distance nature of their relationship with him in London and Natalie in LA. She and Gregson had a daughter, Natasha, born in 1970. Natasha Gregson Wagner. I believe Natasha was his fourth daughter and Natalie's first. Natasha was born in 1970. Oh, sorry, I just said that. According to Gregson, Natalie loved Natasha more than anyone or anything in her life. Natalie later reunites with her ex-husband, Wagner, who she ends up remarrying in 1972, and having her second daughter with him, Courtney Brooke Wagner. To also mention that Natalie had a deep fear of dying in dark water, once being told to beware of dark water, according to one source, possibly something to do with a fortune teller as told by her mother, saying she would die in dark waters. Some sources mention a murder book, homicide investigation, records kept by homicide detectives in LA Sheriff's Office. Wood married, divorced, and remarried Robert Wagner. He often described how Wood takes my breath away. Yet after Natalie went missing, he took no part in the 2.5-hour search near their boat on Catalina Island. So Natalie died November 29th, 1981, at 43 years old. Young 43. Just want to say how much my heart hurts for the loss of her. Natalie was on her yacht with her husband, Wagner, and her co-star, Christopher Walken, along with Tavern. Some sources say that Natalie was the first of the three to go to bed. It is alleged that no one heard her, but that at some point the men noticed the lifeboat dinghy was gone after she went missing from her yacht, the Splendor. 6 hours later, she was discovered face down floating in the Pacific Ocean. She was wearing her nightgown, a jacket, and socks. This occurred in the Pacific Ocean close to Santa Catalina Island, while she and her co-star were on a break from filming the movie Brainstorm. So, on the evening this occurred, Walken, Wagner, and Wood, and Tavern, the deckhand, were having dinner at Duck's Harbor Reef. During dinner, a glass was thrown at the wall by one of the men. Walken, at some point, owned up to having a small beef with Wagner, though he says it had more to do with how long Wood and Wagner were away from their daughter and his disapproval of this. So he says, prior to returning to the yacht, the restaurant owner described them as being too intoxicated to return safely. Claims he asked Safe Harbor Patrol to assist. Dinner concluded at 10:30 p.m. Parties buzzed on champagne. According to sources, Natalie's BAC was 0.14 at the time of her death. It was also mentioned that conversation did occur between Wagner and Walken, where Wood was not present. Unlike some accounts that state things did not cool off so much as escalate when the gang made their way back to the yacht, the Splendor. Drinking went on, with an enraged Wagner breaking a wine bottle on the table and screaming at Walken, accusing the man of efforts to sleep with his wife. According to Tavern, by 11:05, Wood is found to be missing. People start looking for her. Then they notice the lifeboat is gone. Some sources claim another witness and her boyfriend heard the sounds of a woman screaming for help at around 11 p.m. Their cries were heard until 11:30 p.m. So Wagner did not seek help until around 1:30 a.m. And the Coast Guard was not contacted until 3:30 a.m. when they last saw her at 11. Essentially, he waited 4 hours to call the Coast Guard, which is highly suspect. Davern remembers returning to Wagner alone, saying Natalie took the dinghy out despite the obvious fact she was perilously afraid of water and highly unlikely to do so. According to her sister Lana, Natalie would never go out at night in her nightgown and vacate the boat. The medical examiner, Thomas Noguchi, so the death was ruled an accident and cause of death drowning, attributing this to her intoxication from downing all that champagne and wine. This was ruled on November 30th, just 2 days later. Death certificate listing probable drowning in the ocean. Then later it was amended to drowning and other undetermined factors. Robert Wagner, person of interest, according to news sources from 2021. Wagner, now roughly 91. He's still stated as a person of interest in the case even today. The case was reopened in November 2011 by LA Sheriff, with Wagner refusing to cooperate with police. Walken, in contrast, has cooperated fully, headed by lead investigators Ralph Hernandez and Kevin Lowe. After 3 witnesses had been found, Walken, Fidel, Herrera, and the deckhand, first being Christopher Walken, who overheard the couple fighting, and that it was possible Wagner had pushed Wood into the water. Some speculate they had some major chemistry going on and that the two were dating. Not sure if this was true or not. The two had been sitting together at the bar for hours prior to Wagner's arrival before heading to dinner that night. The second is Fidel Herrera, who photographed Natalie's remains for the coroner's office. He saw serious injuries to her head, which Hernandez says his photos corroborated. Wounds, he says, are troubling. These injuries open up possibilities of intentional harm done to Wood. Homicide. Possible. A violent dispute may have occurred, which got out of hand, leading to Wood being pushed or tossed into the water after being rendered unconscious. Deckhand on the yacht neglected to mention Wood being pushed, though he did so when he was unaware he was still being recorded. Without a witness who will speak publicly on the record to seeing Natalie's nudge into the water, the DA's office is unable to bring the case to trial to a grand jury. Then there's Dr. Michael Franco, who has been working as a family medicine specialist in LA. At the time of Natalie's death, he was interning at LA Coroner's Office. So an intern, he was never recorded as an employee and was thus not questioned in relation to her case. Franco has mentioned seeing physical evidence on Natalie's remains inconsistent with homicide. Remains consistent with homicide. I'm sorry, I misread that. Though he waited 40 years to break this silence and do the right thing. He saw bruises on her interior, on the front of her thighs, and shins, injuries that he said looked like friction burns. This stuck out to him. It struck him as odd as the striations indicated. Marks in the opposite direction to those you would expect to find someone trying to get back onto a boat. The concentration of bruises to her lower interior thigh and shins was more likely to be consistent with injuries sustained from being propelled or pushed from the vessel. The displacement from the boat via push would have been carried out using a lot of force or involving a force pulling her off the boat with considerable strength. Franco also mentions the possibility the striations in the autopsy may indicate Natalie attempted to maneuver herself into the lifeboat, but was being pushed down and was unable to gain purchase in the dinghy. Either way, considerable strength would have been required to sustain these injuries and would not have been a result of efforts on Wood's part to climb back on her vessel. Pattern of injuries contradicted the medical examiner's ruling. Franco asks Dr. Noguchi about the abrasions explaining the direction of the pattern and asking about the rolling. He stops, looks at Franco, and responds, "Some things are best left unsaid. However, it was written up. That's all you need to know." Sus. However, no. Admitting to intentionally ruling in opposition to the visible evidence. Essentially, this was a cover-up. Natalie Wood's death wasn't an accident. Somebody pushed her. I wasn't following the case, so I don't know who all the players were. I wasn't playing detective. I wasn't interested in all that information. All I knew was what I saw. I knew this wasn't a simple drowning. She had some abrasions that I could come to the conclusion that she was pushed off of whatever it was she was holding on to. There's no reason to have those unless you're being pushed off a surface. And they were deeper than just a simple slip-off because there's some back and forth. Consider the possibility as well that Wagner dropped the lifeboat to give the impression Wood went to shore, as was the story he gave police. Deckhand Davern did recall the dropping of the dinghy during the fighting he'd been hearing on the rear of the deck. He recalls RJ being close by the lifeboat. He noticed later how sweaty RJ was, that he looked like he'd been engaged in some kind of struggle. He also overheard RJ yelling at Natalie saying, "Get off my fucking boat." When amending his statement to police, Davern mentioned RJ's refusal to turn. Searchlights on to look for Wood, not wanting to attention brought to her disappearance. Davern also shares about how jealous Wagner was of Christopher Walken, which had created this tension between the three of them. The morticians who embalmed Natalie Wood, Alan Abbott from Abbott and Ast Mortuary, shared in his 2016 book how she was dressed in a huge fur coat and covered in bruises from where she had hit the rocks. That the coat was selected to disguise or cover the bruises for the viewing. Natalie's sister Lana believes she was murdered. She says that Natalie's agent, Guy McEwen, stopped in to speak with her several days after Natalie passed. He shared that RJ had told him about the night on the boat, McEwen, saying, "I would tell you, but I don't trust you." Lana asked for clarification, to which he responded, "Someday you're going to say something and I don't want RJ hurt. Nobody needs to be hurt anymore, except somebody already was hurt." Except somebody was hurt. My foot was going numb. And I was like, what is that? In 2018, LA Sheriff referred to her case as an undeniably suspicious death, particularly as he was the last person seen with her. His version of events has not been consistent, and his story does not add up. He also has been less reticent to cooperate in the investigation period. In an HBO documentary, what remains behind her case has been discussed and explored. LA Lieutenant John Green has said, "She got in the water somehow, and I don't think she got in the water by herself." Wood's ex-husband, Richard Gregson, ends up, obviously catching wind of her death when his son Hugo calls him devastated and crying. He had been listening to the radio when he heard of her drowning. He calls his dad to share the devastating news. It was hard for them to believe, especially her ex-husband Gregson, who knew that death by drowning was one of her worst nightmares, something she talked about often, describing the dark water. Natasha was 11 when Natalie passed and had been living with her mother, stepfather, and stepsister up to this point. The chaos of phone calls and seeking further information on what happened to Natalie and what was going on. Interesting as well that the news knew it before her ex-husband or her daughter Natasha. According to Gregson and the Guardian, RJ's yacht had been moored off Catalina Island the night Natalie had drowned. It was late when she fell overboard. No one heard her cry for help, like the decent man he was. He felt a terrible accountability. Seeing her mom's body and saying goodbye, how, for her, her daughter Natasha, it was vital for her to truly accept her mother as being dead. Prior to her death, Natalie had been writing a memoir where she describes herself by saying, Daisy Clover faced every major crisis alone. There was nobody to pull her out of trouble. I felt there was a lot of me and Daisy. I really relate to that quote. I don't know, just hit my heart. Natalie was not protected by those in her life who should have been protecting her. She died in the manner that was her worst nightmare. No one called for help or responded when she called out from the sea. The fight between Wood and Robert was so loud, others in boats nearby could hear their heated disputes. Despite this fact, help was not called for until hours had passed, and by then it was too late. Add to this silence of those in close proximity, and one can't deny the suspicious elements surrounding this case. In the documentary remains behind Wood and Wagner's daughter, Natasha speaks with Wagner, asking him if he had a part in her mother's death, which he emphatically denies. Natasha does not believe he has a part in her mother's death, though I don't agree. But I think that when it's your parents, you want to think the best of them. And it could also be denial, and not necessarily that she actually doesn't think he did it. But, each their own. Also, there is a book by Finstad, a biography on Wood, if you're interested in more on Natalie Wood. So, anyways, I hope you found this case interesting. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and sweet dreams, Moonies.